Hello and welcome to Jerome Foundation's 2025 Film Production Grant Budget Webinar. I'm Eleanor Savage. I'm president of Jerome Foundation, and I am pronoun flexible. And I'll invite the other Jerome staff to introduce yourselves.
Hey everyone, my name is TA and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a program officer based in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Jerome Foundation.
Hi everyone, my name is Nala Gustin. I use she and they pronouns. I'm based in New York City and I work as the program strategist.
I'm Andrea Brown. I'm the finance and operations manager at Jerome. I use she, her pronouns.
We're joining you today from Minnesota Makoche, also called Minnesota. It's the homeland of the Dakota people. And today there are 11 tribes, including 4 Dakota and 7 Anishinaabe. We also have staff joining from the lands of the Lenape, Munsee, Canarsie, and many other tribes in what is also called New York City. We honor and respect the tribal sovereignty, rights, and cultural resilience of the many Native and Indigenous peoples connected to these lands. In this webinar, we'll share tips for developing your film budget specific to Jerome Foundation's Film Production Grant Program, and we hope more widely applicable for other fundraising opportunities. We'll share a quick overview of how the request for a budget relates to the overall grant application, and then dive into best practices and resources for film budgeting. If you are looking for comprehensive information about Jerome Foundation's film program, we encourage you to read the program and application guide or watch the webinar, both available on our website. We'll share the link. And we will share links to resources throughout the presentation, and you can also find them in the video description.
All right, so we're going to dig into my favorite topic, budgets. So this first slide is a very varied, multicolored slide that surveys the budgets of films that have recently premiered at major American film festivals, including Sundance, South by Southwest, and Tribeca, and includes the mix of their funding sources and distribution rights available at the time of their premiere. This slide was created by the distribution advocates at the Shorenstein Center at the Harvard Kennedy School, and you could read their full report in a link that Andrea will drop in the chat. I wanted to have a start here to say that you can make a great film that reaches people at any budget size and to offer a layer of transparency to what can sometimes be an opaque topic, which is budgets. The Jerome Foundation does not have a minimum or maximum budget that you can apply with. In the last few rounds of this program, budgets have ranged from $18,000 to $2 million. The key message that you as the director want to communicate in your budget is feasibility, which is the ability that you can create your film with your proposed funds, team, and time allotted. When assessing feasibility, panelists look for evidence that you have thought realistically about the budget. Panelists are experienced filmmakers and will know if the budget is out of line with the proposed project. Panelists recognize that Jerome funding can, on occasion, be the first confirmed funding for a project and can then help secure or leverage additional funds. Secured funding is not required. At the same time, panels are charged with investing grant funds in viable projects that are likely to move forward. Providing a list of other secured and/or potential funds gives the panel an indication of how realistic your planning has been for the project and how likely the project is to move forward. Projects with no backup funding sources or inflated or unrealistic expectations about other contributors will raise questions about feasibility. So having a contingency plan is an important way to communicate to panelists that you have options for moving forward if you're not successful in raising the full amount of your budget. And understanding that every filmmaker is under-resourced in the innumerable ways inequity impacts access to resources, financial need is not a criterion panelists use to assess applications.
Please note that this grant can be entirely used for production, but it cannot be used solely for pre-production, post-production, or distribution. At least 50% of the funds must be used for production. You'll see on screen and in the program guide on page 9 examples of the types of expenses the foundation funds related to various stages of production.
We want to encourage you to align your budget with your values. Budgets are a story about how we put monetary value towards the things and people that we care about. This slide has links to 2 fantastic resources, and they are from organizations that are documentary specific, but their information translates to other forms of independent filmmaking and storytelling across mediums. The first is from the Doc Accountability Working Group's framework from reflection to release on how to work with film participants and teams equitably and have ongoing consent conversations and reflect on power and authorship. The second is from the Documentary Producers Alliance, or the DPA. This resource is called the Anti-Racist and Structural Equality Resource Guide and has a treasure trove of articles, resources, and tools to develop and implement such tools as an inclusion writer, an access writer. It also hosts inclusive hiring databases, nonviolent communication and conflict resolution, guides to working with First Nations communities, examining privilege, instituting fair pay, challenging white dominant culture, and so much more.
Let's shift now to the budget specifics. We provide a sample budget template in the application, which is to give you an idea of the level of detail we're looking for and how to organize the fields. If you have already created a budget, fantastic. You may use it as long as it includes all of the baseline information that was listed on the Jerome template. On the left, you'll see excerpts of a detailed line item budget. It is organized differently than the budget template, but it does include the same kinds of line items. On the right is a budget top sheet, which does not give panelists enough information to evaluate your application and would not be acceptable for your application.
So you're starting your budget. Let's first say that budgeting is research, and your fundraising strategy should include flexibility. A 7 to 10% contingency is recommended, and we'll go into further detail on how to build a contingency plan. First, you'll categorize your budget by production stage and expense type. I'll note here as well, if you are working with a fiscal sponsor to accept some funds, don't forget to include that fee as well. A good fiscal sponsor will charge between 2 to 7% to process grant funds using their 501c3 nonprofit status. And please also remember that grant funds from Jerome Foundation must be accepted by an individual or LLC. Unlike some other grant programs, you may not channel this grant through a fiscal sponsor. So funding your film is going to be a winding road, and there will be many different methods that you'll use when you come to the end to bring your film to completion. And we have a list of those methods here. I'm going to offer some definitions just so everyone is working with the same knowledge. So first, grants are non-recoupable funds that subsidize a film production in the form of a monetary gift from an institution that does not need to be returned. A donation would be the same thing from an individual. Next, tax credits and incentives are often local government opportunities using the tax system to reduce the cost of a film production in their locale. For example, incentivizing hiring locally, shooting on location, or spending a certain amount of money in a region. Next, equity and debt financing. Equity is a temporary loan given to a filmmaker by an individual investor who expects their money back. If the investor wants their money back with an additional interest rate, this is referred to as debt financing. Investors may also negotiate for a partial ownership stake of the film's intellectual property, a share of profits from a potential acquisition, and theatrical bookings, and certain credits such as executive producer. Next is crowdfunding, which is a way to raise funds from a large number of people that you may or may not know necessarily directly, often through online programs such as Kickstarter or social media. Fellowships and filmmaker labs are artist development opportunities run often by nonprofit artist institutions to hone your craft and connect with other filmmakers. Some may also come with a small to medium-sized grant. They'll often hear the primary resource being shared as in-kind support through personal and professional development, networking you, and also introducing your film to future funders, partners, and champions. Acquisition is when a studio, streamer, network, or distribution company negotiates with a sales agent to buy certain rights of your film and offer the film directly to audiences, either globally or a certain part in the world, and is sliced up between in-person and digital rights. When this sale happens before a film has premiered, it's called pre-sales. And when it comes after, it's just usually referred to as acquisition. If an independent film is acquired, it is often at or after a film festival, and that's why there's often so much emphasis on where you premiere a film and the health of its marketplace. Next, self-funding. This is when you use your own money to finance your film. This is common in DIY spaces, first-time filmmakers, and on the other end, very wealthy, well-established celebrity filmmakers. And here I've made the reference to Megalopolis by Francis Ford Coppola. Finally, in-kind donations are often of time or equipment that can help build your budget with favors from other filmmakers and friends to do tasks and agreed upon labor that would otherwise be compensated. This is not a replacement for fair pay and is often covered by one-time agreements, for example, such as getting access to an editing bay over the weekend or a discounted or free camera rental from maybe an alumni organization or borrowing a car from a friend for a production shoot. So here we're going to talk about the difference between pending and secured funds. When you're listing your funding resources, please clearly and transparently list the names of all of your individual donors, nonprofits, foundations, in-kind donations, and equity investors who may have contributed to the film, their rates, and agreed upon rights. This is important for every single grant you will apply to, and is particularly important when you're in production and distributors, funders, and investors are assessing the rights still available for profit potential. On this slide, for example, this applicant is planning to apply for funding opportunities that come with mandatory co-production agreements from a public broadcaster. If their applications are accepted, their US broadcasting rights would no longer be available. If a funder requires that all rights are available, which is quite common, this applicant would be ineligible for those kinds of opportunities. Luckily, this applicant has labeled that they haven't applied yet, and clear labeling can help solve these kinds of questions that a funder or panelist may ask. It is wise to continue to update your budget regularly to reflect the status of your various pending funding applications. Another note on listing application status: if you're planning to apply to a program next summer, you could label that will apply. If you have an application currently under review for a fellowship, that would be labeled pending. If you've received a rejection notification, you might update the year that you plan to apply for their following cycle and label will apply. Only checks in the bank should be labeled as secured. Promise grants that you have been notified about but have not yet received should be labeled as confirmed or accepted. And then you can also list the date, for example, August 2025. Next, we'll cover how to budget for key creative staff, known as producing staff or above the line crew, who help determine the voice, vision, and budget for the entire film. This can include directors, producers, and writers. Director and producer fees are traditionally budgeted as flat project fees, in part because they are considered to be the management and responsible for the budget and schedule of the film. They may have ownership or revenue participation of the project, in the example of maybe the film turns a profit. And 3, they are engaged in long-term work on the film, which will be a mix of full-time and part-time work over many years. As a rule of thumb, director and producer fees range from 5 to 10% of the budget, though the budget also influences the percentage. For example, a lower budget film often will have a higher rate of pay for the directors and producers, and a higher budget film may have a cap for what these folks can be paid. In addition, if their fees are divided into months or years, it should result in a reasonable and appropriate salary for the given location. For this reason, we suggest that you note the monthly or yearly breakdown in the description field on these lines to show what might first appear to be a large fee could actually be quite reasonable over many years. If you are directing full-time, you may be able to develop, shoot, edit, premiere, and market a feature-length film in 2 to 3 years, but most independent artists are also teachers. They are maybe taking commercial projects, running a business, caretaking, and so much more. So please give yourself and your team a feasible timeline that holistically supports your creative process. I'll say one more thing here too. Many now argue that flat fees can only be considered equitable if they are based on contracts with clear parameters and an agreement on what they're meant to cover, including the activities and how much support staff will be available, and what happens if there are any major schedule shifts. Most importantly, fees should be paid. The Producers Guild of America recommends that producers never work without a contract or work for free, even on a temporary basis, in what's often referred to as deferment. For a deep dive around all these issues, you can check out the DPA's Code of Ethics, which Andrea will drop the chat, as well as the DPA guidelines for negotiating contracts.
These next slides offer examples of some of the expenses and rates you might want to budget for in each production stage, starting in pre-production or development. So here's a detailed budget related to a research trip, or you can provide this kind of information as a summary in your above-the-line expenses. Your production fees can include costs incurred while shooting, along with any rehearsals, location fees, equipment rental or purchase, travel, and director or other crew fees. Here are some examples of some of the expenses and rates you might want to budget for in post-production, distribution, and administrative costs. This can include errors and omissions, otherwise known as E&O insurance, legal, and bookkeeping costs.
The Jerome Foundation application will ask specific questions about your intentions for impact, connecting to audiences and communities, and distribution. Your budget is a chance to reinforce to panelists that you have a plan for your film and that your film is feasible. Distribution is how your film reaches audiences, and exhibition is where your film reaches audiences. The distribution landscape for independent films and the exhibition landscape for films of all genres, lengths, and budgets has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, as we are in a new attention economy with more people watching shorter bursts of media from home. While the budget template will provide you with a single line item for distribution, distribution expenses can be wide-ranging and robust and may include publicists, awards campaigns, film posters, travel and hotels, film screenings, agents, campaign managers, caterers, venues, moderators, re-editing your film for broadcast, and final delivery are all a part of distribution. In many ways, running a distribution is running an election campaign, and you should plan and budget for additional year after the film premieres to bring the film to audiences. If you'd like to learn more, Doc Society's Impact Field Guide and Toolkit is a great resource for planning and budgeting self-distribution and impact campaigns. Keep in mind that some funders and companies, especially broadcasters, won't fund those activities, so it's best to budget them for yourself. Next, we'll talk about contingency. Along your fundraising journey, you may need to reckon with a certain level of uncertainty and forking paths. Every artist hopes to raise their full Plan A budget, otherwise known as a Cadillac budget, where the film not only closes their production budget, but turns a profit. It's also helpful to have a Plan B and even a bare bones Plan C budget for your team to work on internally. Plan A might include full professional rates and be the best possible scenario for everything. This is the budget that you'll submit to potential funders of all sizes like Jerome Foundation. Plan B may involve some compromises, and the fail-safe Plan C is the absolute minimum needed to complete the project and may require calling in precious one-time favors from friends and colleagues and making difficult creative or logistical sacrifices, like cutting a production trip or shortening an edit schedule. Plan C will remain entirely private to you and your key creative team and should prevent everyone from going into any kind of debt. We know that many artists take out personal or small business loans to finance film projects, but we want to say clearly here that this is not a practice that Jerome encourages or expects. So how do you build a contingency plan? As you build your Plan A, B, and C, there's a free resource where you can rate potential funding sources, the likelihood of acceptance, and the amount of the gift to fit with your potential funder. So for example, if there's an opportunity that is worth $15,000 and you think it's a 75% likelihood, this tool allows you to determine the size of the gift that you may receive and build a comprehensive and holistic budget. So Andrea will drop these links into the chat for the presentation and this budget contingency tool. And these tools were built by the Doc NYC New Leaders group of the past year.
Now let's talk about budgeting for accessibility. An accessible film is made by informed choices at every production stage. First, we like to think of accessibility of the film team, participants, and industry collaborators. Some productions ask for voluntary access writers from each crew person to learn about specific accessibility requirements as soon as possible. These writers can also help identify additional needs like childcare and elder care. There's a resource from the Arts Council England, which we can drop also below. And during production, some access requirements will be informed by the activity or location. For example, certain expenses may be needed during travel, working on set, and editing. To fully integrate captions and audio descriptions into your production flow, Try to think of them not as last-minute post-production tasks, but as creative elements that need care and collaboration from the filmmaking team to fully communicate the film's intentions and be culturally sensitive to its content. In addition, as accessibility is integrated into the filmmaking process from the very beginning, deeper questions that affect schedule or budget may emerge, such as planning visuals to leave room on screen for captions, or adjusting the editing rhythm to leave space for subtitles, captions, or audio descriptions, which I will briefly provide definitions for. Transcripts covering all audible and visual elements are essential to support closed captions and audio descriptions, and for film team and distributor access during production and offline editing. Closed captions, or CCAP, sometimes also known as subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, are similar to subtitles but are generally in the same language as spoken in the film. Closed captions include spoken dialogue, changes of speaker, descriptions of music, and key sound effects, for example, knock at door, to make the film accessible without sound. Closed captions are required by nearly all festivals, distributors, and global streaming platforms. Open captions are the written, on-screen, and consistent display of this textual element of the film for all viewers for the entirety of the film. And last, audio descriptions are audio tracks for blind and low vision audiences that include the full soundtrack but add verbal commentary on what is happening visually on screen, both to set the scene and location and describe action and other details. For example, Sophia whirls and bounces on the trampoline, giggling. These three accessibility elements, transcripts, closed captions, and audio descriptions, are increasingly standard deliverables to reach wide audiences and are now required by many film festivals, award bodies, television networks, and streaming platforms, as well as trailers, marketing assets, festival and awards screeners, and social media that includes image descriptions and alt text. Finally, consider budgeting and planning for accessibility for online or in-person events related to the film, so that audiences everywhere can engage meaningfully with your work and feel welcomed and valued. For extensive resources regarding accessibility in independent film, we'll drop some resources in the description from Access Lab, Deaf Professional Arts Network, Filmmakers with Disabilities, and a resource from the Inevitable Foundation.
There's some additional resources we want to make sure you know about, and full information about all of them is in the Minnesota and New York City program and application guides. There's an informational webinar for New York City film production and a separate informational webinar for the Minnesota film production and filmmaker mentorship programs. There's also a session specifically about creating work samples and for creating your filmmaker CV for this and other grant programs. All recordings are posted to our website. Just go to the page for the specific program that you're interested in. If you have questions about your eligibility or general questions about the program, we encourage you to make a phone call appointment with program staff. You can sign up for a time between now and March 28th, or you can send your questions by email. Just check out the help and resources section for each program. We want to remind you that applications are due before 4 p.m. Central and 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, April 3rd. Late applications will not be accepted. All applicants will be notified of their status no later than October 20th, 2025. Thanks everyone for joining us.